All right, people, you know what time it is. We're wrapping up the year, which means, of course, it's Marvel time. I've got one returning face. I've got one guy who's completely new to the channel, and that's right, people. We're wrapping it up. We're ranking every single Marvel Cinematic Universe property released in 2021. Their return to form and the biggest year that they've ever had since the start, because in total, we've got 9 MCU properties that aired this year. It's an insane number. Eli Hawkeye is here. Eric Thorpe is here. We'll be back to you guys in a bit with our official rankings. All right, and what better way to kick off the end of the year Marvel celebration than 3 white pasty-faced dudes talking about the biggest nerd franchise on the planet. What's going on, guys? Happy to have you here. This is going to be a fun night. If this is anything like the Spider-Man ranking that we did last week, it's going to be insane, because I hope that we have some really controversial choices with the selections that we have. Luke is here. Oh my God, Eli. John actually hopped on a YouTube video of ours, and all we had to do was actually get you on and have it be live. And of course, we have our good friend Luke of Luke Reviews tuning in from Latvia. Evening, gents. Merry Christmas Eve. We're still a couple days away, Luke, but yes, good to see that the festivities are going on. So, to my left, we have returning face of the channel. He's our local fantasy head. He helped me out with the Wheel of Time podcast a couple of weeks ago. Eli Hawkeye. Eli, happy to have you back on, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course, you're ready to get your very well kept hidden MCU Phase 4 rankings out of the way?
Oh, absolutely I am.
Oh man, it's gonna be a fun one. I can tell you got some opinions definitely to release. And right below us, we have newcomer to the channel, but avid Talking Thrones fan and supporter. He has his own YouTube channel, Mr. Eric Thorpe of Eric Thorpe Reviews. What's going on, dude? Happy to have you here.
Hey, yeah, thanks so much for having me here. It's really exciting to talk actually face to face finally.
Face to face, exactly. Put a face in the name, exactly. Oh man, going into this, guys, starting with Eric. Just what were your thoughts on Marvel this year? What they put out? What kind of like their return to our screens after a year of no new content from them felt like? Kind of them branching out. The fact that we were arguably getting like long form, like micro stories on the television level, in addition to kind of like the big blockbuster events from them that we were so used to. Also, this being the first MCU year ever that they put out 4 films in one calendar year. Starting with Eric, what were your thoughts on Marvel's 2021?
So without giving away my thoughts on any of the specific movies yet, I think the bulk of it was kind of bland. That's what I would say in comparison to especially Phase 3 and stuff. There's a couple of projects in here, obviously not going to say which ones, that I think are some of the best they've ever done. But there's a good chunk that's also bottom tier MCU for me. So that's how I feel about it.
Interesting. Eli, what about you?
For the most part, I agree. I think bland is definitely a word that would maybe come to mind when I describe it. I want to maybe say underwhelming. Also, I think would be, if I had to sum it up in one word, I think underwhelming would use.
Interesting. So what I'll say is that for kind of the return to Marvel after so many years of pulse pounding excitement that we're used to from them, is a different year for them. Definitely. They really took the TV modicum and applied that to their storytelling, which is ironic because they were kind of what made kind of their approach to filming so interesting is how they ultimately used each of their 2.5-hour long event movies as a piece in this one overall story. Like they literally basically retconned the television writing model for their entire story, Infinity Saga, that started with Iron Man and ended effectively with Avengers Endgame. So I found it interesting, to say the least, that they chose to expand out into TV, but this time actually with television shows that were fully embraced within the continuity and a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe story, which is something that the Netflix shows never ultimately achieved, which is ironic. This also being the phase where they actually bring back the Netflix movies. But I guess for me, the biggest takeaway from this year is that it certainly felt underwhelming at a lot of points. But with Marvel, you always have to look at it from the big picture. And what I saw is them ultimately kind of showing their cards as far as, okay, this was the story that was told previously with the first 3 phases. This is truly a left shift into new territory, into new storytelling. And their approach this time is arguably their smartest yet, because again, they've had 10 plus years of experience of being the biggest pop culture icon in entertainment. And their approach was, okay, let's use all these leftover characters that people are still familiar with and are still alive in order to usher in all of these new figures. Like, 'cause if you think about it, there are only two real original properties that were not based off of pre-existing characters were Shang-Chi and Eternals. That's it, which is crazy considering that you were coming off a phase that had, I think, the most new introductions, because if I remember correctly, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel. Yeah, 4 new entries. So that's the most amount of new characters that they introduced in a phase. So that to me is impressive right there. But we're going to get into all these rankings, but I wanted to, of course, start off with a modicum that, again, if you have not seen Spider-Man No Way Home, then click out of this video because we are going to spoil it once we effectively rank it, just so you guys know. But so how this is going to work is we're going to go in a roundtable function. We're going to go in batches of 3, which is where, so Eric, we'll start with you. You'll give your 7 through 9. Then Eli goes to you. You give your 7 through 9, then to me, and kind of on and on it goes until we collectively get to number 1, which we all have the same one. I'm just going to let everyone know that right now. Immediately, it's pretty obvious which one it is, but we'll make it fun just for fun's sake in order to fill this up. So, guys, you ready to do this?
Absolutely.
All right, let's rank then. So, Eric, we're going to start with you. What is your number 9, number 8, number 7 for everything that came out Marvel related in 2021?
Okay, so number 9, actually, yeah, it's good doing this in 3s because these are actually the 3. That's where I draw the line. These are all kind of bottom tier MCU for me. These are, and I don't think, to be fair, I'm someone who doesn't think the MCU's done anything terrible, but I think these are all, they're at the bottom. So my number 9 is Black Widow, which I will say, I didn't say it wasn't like totally unenjoyable, but it was just kind of, it did feel like kind of lazy almost, I guess, compared to like some of their previous efforts. And after all this time waiting for a Black Widow movie, and then it just, there were just a lot of it just felt kind of lacking about it, I guess. And then my number 8 is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because I was really into it for the bulk of it, but I don't know, by the end, it just sort of felt like the whole thing could have been a movie instead of like a show. I don't know if it was one of the shows that really felt like it needed to be a show. And then I guess number 7 is, I think this is probably one of my more hot takes here, is Shang-Chi. I know a lot of people probably have that one higher. And for me, I don't know. I liked it enough, I guess, but I was kind of underwhelmed, maybe because of all the hype going into it. And I did think it had like it was like the prime example of just like the humor undercutting the rest of the movie, I found. And
Interesting.
Yeah. So those are my
interesting takes, definitely. Eli, going over to you. What is your 7 through 9?
Yeah, so at number 9, I have Eternals. I was not a fan of it. I have some very strong opinions on the movie that I'm sure we'll be able to dive into a little bit.
Please,
but yeah,
please do them now.
Just well, I don't think I've ever seen a movie that has had such an amazing cast, just an incredible budget and a great story, and it still be just so just clunky and just uninteresting and just a waste of potential, I guess, is one way I could say it. I think the ideas they had going for it was like pretty cool and ambitious, but just in terms of execution, I think they messed it up in almost every single way possible. A lot of the character arcs just didn't really amount to anything. There were some decisions that certain characters make that just made absolutely zero sense. And it just, overall, I just was not enjoying it one little bit. I think I laughed my way through that movie for a good period.
I was about to say, I'm like, I watched it with you, and I was there when when we both saw it. I was like, I'll admit, part of the fun of that movie was watching you just react to it.
Yeah, it was definitely one to forget for me personally.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, okay, so moving on, at 8, I also have Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I just felt like some of the ideas, again, were very great. That's what I feel like a common theme with Phase 4 is just a lot of the ideas with some of the shows they have and movies were phenomenal, but just they could have executed them better, I feel. And I feel like, especially with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I feel like has seen like the most criticism for maybe like the forced messaging behind a lot of the scenes and everything, a lot of the big moments that happen within the series, and that's at least my stance on it. And then at number 7, I have Black Widow, which it's just, I don't know. I guess bland is a great way I can describe it. It's just, I guess, generic MCU filler. That's what you want to call it. I just didn't think anything special of it. I pretty much forgot about it the night I saw it and continued on with my life.
Damn.
I have really nothing else to say apart from that. I did enjoy some of the characters. I did enjoy a few characters, I won't lie, but I just didn't think it was that memorable personally.
So clearly you weren't the only one, because obviously Marvel brought back Yelena Belova for Hawkeye. But yeah, interesting rankings. I'm seeing some similarities overall as we were going into this. Just kind of across the board, Eternals and Falcon and Winter Soldier were some of the more lesser, well-reviewed ones. Some interesting takes, though. Eli, I feel like you were probably the most spot on as far as the Black Widow take. Eric, with you as well, because I know a lot of people were not fans of Black Widow for a lot of other reasons. But let's get mine out of the way. My number 9, Eternals, just... for me, like, look, I'll say this, Eric, I get where you're coming from as far as why you enjoy this movie. And in a strange way, I feel like if a lot of people do enjoy this movie, it's like every year I have that one movie where I'm like, okay, I understand why people enjoy it, even if I didn't, and how I personally see it's flawed. Because, Eli, I think a mutual friend of ours said this the best, where it's like, how do you have a great cast and actually a pretty damn good story and you still manage to screw this up? And for me, it comes down to ultimately Chloe Zhao's take and handling of the story. I think that it was definitely a situation where she kind of got a little bit too ambitious for her own good. She's like, okay, I got Marvel money and they're giving me carte blanche. I'm just using these characters in my toy sandbox. And the problem is that with something like this, it's to me like this was Marvel's most bold decision yet as far as choosing to go with this story and with this type of a story. Like, it's a major kind of creationist story, which I'm like, wow, that seems a little weighty even for my Marvel standards. And again, great cast. The visuals in the film were great, but I think what the problem comes from is Chloe Zhao's, between both her handling of the story and her handling of the visual look of the film, because the film still has that very flat, bland-looking Marvel exterior, even if a lot of the shots are done in actual, like, real settings, as opposed to green screen studios. That sure was a nice change of pace, but ultimately the film's slow pace, heightened sense of weightiness, and actual like real lack of a good payoff for me is really what sinks it as low as it is. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I rate everything based on experience level, and this was easily the worst experience that I had with an MCU thing this year. And we got a lot of MCU things this year, as the rest of this list shows. My number 8, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Same spot as both of you. This is another shared spot that all three of us have. We had a lot of those. Yeah, this should have been awesome, which is really probably the first reason why it's as low as it is, because you're following up because Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes are both characters that have been set up in the Steve Rogers sect, and everything Steve Rogers post the first Avengers has been, for the most part, fucking incredible. Like the look and style of action that the Russo brothers brought to Winter Soldier that followed throughout Civil War, and then they're both their ensemble Avengers movies that they did is unbelievable. It influenced action and elevated action to a new way. And both of these actors and characters were crucial parts of that. And now they're getting their own thing apart from Steve Rogers. This, by all means, should have been the best thing that came out this year. And I don't know what it was. If it just was the fact that it clearly should have been a film, but also was kind of wrecked, because I also know that this was another thing very similar to Eternals that had a lot of behind-the-scenes problems. They reshot the entire third act after a scrapped, frankly, rightly so, subplot involving a virus. The focus as well was just on all the wrong spots, where the heroes at the end of the day end up like trading quips, trading what's the word, like motivational speeches back and forth while throwing around a frisbee, and it's completely boring. Yes, indeed, Latvia is indeed MCU canon because of Falcon. So you got to remember, when they eventually bring in Dr. Doom into this, you got to give respect where it is owed. But also the fact that, again, so that's the heroes. The villains, you have 2 excellent, amazing setups for incredible villains in this show, with both Baron Zemo and John Walker. To me, the most underrated and undervalued addition to the MCU yet. I cannot wait to see him back. And the focus is on the Flag Smashers, who are boring, uninteresting, don't even really seem to believe in their mission. It's honestly kind of weird because like when it was revealed that like Morgenthau works for Sharon Carter, I was like, oh, that could have actually been something interesting. And again, it's another thing that gets bogged down under its own weightiness. It is way too it is trying way too hard to force a message down your throat, which I'm like, look, I don't like when any movie does that, but when it comes from the MCU, which is something that I think has done a pretty good job of avoiding that in the past, it definitely felt particularly egregious. Every scene with what's his name, Isaiah Bradley, I was starting to get bored. I'm like, okay, I get where this is going. And yeah, for the payoff to be as lame as it was, and for ultimately for the 6th episode kind of like extended movie structure that / miniseries structure that Marvel's applied to all these series, this one definitely suffered the most from it. So that's that. And then number 7, Eric, we shared the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Watch this movie, came out. It was another example of one of those films that I'm like, okay, this is good. And everyone else went apeshit. Like, this is like one of the best movies ever. That never does well for me for a movie. And then I went back and reconsidered it. And I'm like, okay, this is half a good movie. Because the first half gets away with being like kind of this homage to Jackie Chan, like the history of martial arts films. That was pretty cool. You know, Marvel is not the best, but it's usually pretty spot on when it comes to its homages to film history. Then we get into the second half. And besides the whole problems with all of the effects and everything, which are just terrible to say the least. I don't know why these studios are borrowing from like their late 2000s days of like having pretty decently rendered CG, but being too scared to show that it's CG, so they just really darkly light it, and you can't tell what's going on. Like, why is it inexplicably shifting from like day to night here? There's no reason why. But yeah, it's a film that, again, as an origin story, it works. It's perfectly competent. It's got a pretty decent cast. If anything, I think the whole leaning into Asian history and more so more so Asian character types and characteristics here. Essentially kind of trying to make this a Black Panther for Asian culture. I definitely feel like they almost should have leaned into that more. You know, like when they got to like the Hidden City with all the CG Pokemon creatures and everything, I was like, okay, this could be pretty good. But yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, it was like a really generic CG third act. And what really killed it for me is this movie committed the cardinal sin of having a really awesome, compelling antagonist. Like the Mandarin and Tony Leung's portrayal is like one of the most compelling villain performances I've seen all year. And the third act, they swap him out for a CG creature. And it feels really unfulfilling and really uninteresting. And and then of course we get the typical MCU post-credit stinger. And I'm like, wow, that totally there's a typical MCU just swiping everything that could be cool and interesting under the rug. Something that our number 1 choices did not do this year, which is what makes it, I think, even more so my number 1 choice. But that's my 9 through 7. So just to recap all of our choices. So Eric has got Black Widow at 9. Falcon and the Winter Soldier at 8, and Shang-Chi at 7. Eli has Eternals at 9, Falcon and the Winter Soldier at 8, and Black Widow at 7. And I myself have Eternals at 9, Falcon and the Winter Soldier at 8, and Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings at 7. Guys, just to keep you informed as well, we're going to be doing a definitive ranking of all of these at the end where we kind of combine all our lists into one entries. So the good thing is it looks like a majority of these are going to like actually maintain their spots. A few of them might get drastically shifted. We'll just have to see and find out. Keep tuning in also. And for all the people who are watching us right now, thank you so much. And click that subscribe button. If you get a chance, it would do us a tremendous favor. We're 3 subscribers away from 400, and we're trying to hit that before the end of 2021. So if you could do that, that would be super awesome. All right. Moving on to our 6 through 4. Eric, what you got?
Okay, so my number 6 is what we just finished today, and that's Hawkeye. And I gotta say, I'm a bit bummed out it's actually this low. When I first started it, I thought it was actually going to be like, I don't know, a bit higher, honestly, because I was really into it like for the first half or so. And I don't know what it was. It's not that it did anything really that wrong. It just sort of felt like the plot just kind of like went like this and never really, I thought it was kind of going to get more interesting, and it sort of never really did for me, despite some cool cameos at the end. Are we going to get into spoilers for that? Or?
Oh yeah, spoilers for everything. Yeah. It's
okay. So like, it was obviously really cool seeing like Wilson Fisk and stuff and how it lined up with obviously like Daredevil even and Spider-Man. But yeah, I don't know, but there's something about it, like, I guess intentionally, because it's like a Christmas thing, but it almost like, I realized by the end, it felt almost too much like, it felt a bit like a Hallmark movie. I don't know, like some of
not
like
a bad comparison.
like, yeah, like some of even like the plots, like some of the drama in the end, I thought it was gonna be something more interesting when they were setting it up, and then it's just very straightforward, and it's like, oh, okay, her mom's a criminal, and I don't know, it felt like, yeah, just yeah, it felt a bit hallmarky to me. That being said, the reason why it is not in like the bottom with the other ones, I did like have a really fun time watching it, and I do think like Jeremy Renner is awesome in it, and Haley Steinfeld, I really liked as Kate Bishop and everything. And yeah, I think it was a cool concept. That's the case with most of Phase 4. I think a lot of it's like, oh, they got something there, and then they just never like go all the way with it. Is sort of what it feels like. But this sort of felt like it could have been like, I almost felt like at the beginning, like I knew it wouldn't, just because of obviously it was pretty comic heavy from the start. But it almost felt like it could have been like the MCU's Logan in a way, like with Hawkeye being like sort of one of the last kind of Avengers still around, and he's like kind of on his own now, and he's like kind of mentoring someone and everything, and it just sort of, and he has this like dark past, I don't know, it's sort of like starting to feel like that, but like obviously much lighter, but then it just sort of pans out with like not really a big emotional ending like something like Logan has or anything. It's just sort of, okay, well, carry on, we set up Kate Bishop now, so I don't know if that's the end of Hawkeye, then it's kind of like, I guess kind of underwhelming if that's like the last time we see Jeremy Renner. I don't know if it will be. I think there's a good chance it won't be, but yeah. So that's my thoughts on Hawkeye. And I guess so. I'll go on my number 5 for.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So then my number 5, and again, this was almost. I expected this to be below Hawkeye, but yeah, it just edged it out because I think ultimately it had lower lows, but it also had some really high highs, and that was What If. And I think just with What If, like I said, like some episodes are pretty like I'm kind of indifferent on, like, but there's some like the Doctor Strange one especially, where it's like, oh, okay, this is setting up some really kind of interesting character drama that we didn't even get in the original Doctor Strange movie. This is actually in some ways more compelling than that movie was, I think. And then you just get really fun things like that we know from the comics, like Marvel Zombies and stuff. Like there's just a lot of moments that are just like, oh man, this is so cool that this is happening, kind of. And I think Jeffrey Wright as the Watcher, like they really made him a fun character to follow. It could have just been the most like generic kind of character telling you this, but I think I don't know, just Jeffrey Wright's amazing in everything. He's like popped up in almost all of my favorite franchises now, and he's always awesome. I'm just waiting for him to pop up in Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon or whatever. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, and it's just a concept they can do anything with. But then there are some like the Killmonger episode where I felt like they just didn't change enough, or like the Thor episode where they felt a little pointless. And I do think what holds it back a bit is it felt a bit forced how it all needs to like still tie together at the end when they finally do like this anthology thing. It felt like suddenly rushed to do like this Avengers of the Multiverse or Guardians of the Multiverse thing at the end. So that's why it's kind of right in the middle for me.
All right.
And
Number
then
4?
Yeah, my number 4 is Eternals, because I get that it has a lot of issues, and I'm not even gonna say like I can't tell you why. They never really explain why what's her name?
Cersei?
No, the kid. Shit.
Oh, Sprite.
Right, yeah. Why Sprite? I don't know why they decided, oh, it's a good idea to have her be a kid. Like they never really explain things, so like that's what holds it back for me. Like there are a lot of issues, I will admit that, but for all those issues, it's a movie that I saw twice, and ultimately, I don't know. I guess I'm just wired differently. I enjoyed it. Like I was excited by it. It felt like epic and different from the rest of the MCU. And I thought it brought up like some interesting questions that did work. Like it makes you think about like the whole kind of universe in this kind of almost humbling sort of way. I think like just like how like these like celestials are like they need to kill all of us just to like for other life to happen, and how like small that makes everything we've seen so far feel. And it's just I get it. I get where I think you guys kind of said this already, that you felt it was kind of good ideas, just not great execution. For me, it was really amazing ideas with good enough execution, and I liked how, I mean, I'm a huge fan of like Zack Snyder and stuff too. So it definitely, I think Chloe Zhao said she like was kind of directly inspired by like what he did with the DC movies and stuff, especially Superman. And I thought it was kind of cool to see that kind of flavor in the Marvel universe, because it's not something you would expect them to do, because how many people are not fans of that. And and it has Kit Harington, so
True, that's true. Well, not just Kit Harington. If we're going by Game of Thrones standards, I mean, come on, we even had comments on it. Both the Stark boys made their reappearances. That man, that's so strange. How like we had so many crossovers. Some of our favorite things this year. We had Marvel crossover with Game of Thrones. What is going on in the world right now? But anyway, so Eli, moving over to you. Your number 6 through 4.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have 2 spots in common with Eric here. I also put Hawkeye at number 6, and I feel like he pretty much touched on everything I ever could. It just felt like more setup than its own individual thing, and it just, I don't know. I was also very underwhelmed by the finale. Just, it didn't feel like it went anywhere. I just didn't feel like there was any real stakes to the story. It was more just like that fun holiday special. It's just there, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on it. Kind of very similar to Black Widow. It's just there. I also have What If at number 5. It was different. I will give it that, and I did enjoy some of the episodes in particular. I thought the zombies one was pretty cool. I did like just a few of them, but overall, I just wasn't amazed by it. It did feel rushed, like Eric said. I just towards the end, it just seemed a little clunky, and just I felt like if they each made their own individual episodes separate, it would have been better. It's just more potential, and I know they've already created like a spin-off show. They're making a spin-off show of the zombies episode, which I'm interested to see where that goes. But it just feels like it's going to inevitably be tied in with the future multiverse things that the
beauty of the multiverse, man. You can do anything. Yep. You can do anything.
Literally anything.
It's literally limitless possibilities. Literally anything could be interconnected. It's crazy. Multiverse is crazy.
And that is one thing I do like about it. It's just like they have just complete like creative liberty with anything they can do moving forward with that. And so maybe I'll like it in the future. I don't know. I would put it just like slightly above average if I had to. But it's it's there. So then at number 4, I have Loki. I do have a little bit of criticism towards it, but overall, I would say it was pretty strong. I didn't like how Loki kind of ended up becoming a side character in his own show. Another big pet peeve of mine personally is the way they handled like the cliffhangers at the end of every episode, and how they basically just resolve them or play them off as like a little joke, like at the very first scene of the next episode. And for me, that's just like a personal like pet peeve with any TV shows or movies when they
really any Marvel property in the last like couple of years,
especially Marvel. A lot of these cliffhangers are just quickly just shrugged off and all right, on to the next thing. I also didn't like how like a lot of the things they introduced, they kind of just like explored it once and then never came back to it, like the being able to hide from Nexus events and catastrophes. Theoretically, like if you like died in like a certain place and like some archaeologists might find your bones and like create like a butterfly effect or something. But that might be a little.
Eli, this is why I love having you on, because you're the only guy I know that would go that deep into like the time travel aspects of it.
And yeah, that might be a little too nitpicky. I also I wasn't a fan of the 3rd episode. I felt like just entire filler, and especially when it's only 6 episodes, because they really need to really do that. It just, I don't know. That was a big personal grievance of mine. Also, do just want to quickly touch on a plot hole that's been bugging me since the very first episode. And how if Loki taking the Tesseract was supposed to be this like reality breaking event that like wasn't supposed to happen or whatever, then they need to address that in Endgame, because some of the time traveling the Avengers did was because Loki took the Tesseract.
Oh, but no, didn't you remember? Didn't you remember? The Avengers saved the universe, so they get a pass. They get a pass.
Right. Yeah, of course. So that's a bit of a.
I had to explain that away. So like, well.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so there's that. Those were a few issues I had with it. Overall, pretty strong. I thought special effects for a TV show were phenomenal. I did like Kang as a villain. I thought they set him up very nicely. I also loved Owen Wilson. He was my 100% my favorite part of that show. But yeah, that's my stance on Loki. So a little lower than where you guys might have it, but I thought it was just slightly better than What If and Hawkeye. Yeah, that's pretty much where I stand on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that should show you that like we've seen the highs, we've seen the lows, and we've seen the mids of the MCU.
Yep.
Like they're really truly achieving their form of diversity. But anyways, so my number 6, it's blowing through mine, is one that again I definitely think was still a little bit slept on, but I do understand everyone's criticism for it. As you can evidence it, I only have it at 6. That's Black Widow. Look, this is a movie that should have happened 4 years ago. We all know this. We've all been over this. If anything, like it was almost like embarrassingly a part of the marketing campaign. It's like she's finally getting her own movie after all this time. And I'm like, oh no, we're already starting. They're already shooting themselves in the foot. So I guess the biggest surprise for me is the fact that I didn't hate this movie going in. In fact, I found it actually pretty compelling. I'm like, okay, this is taking like all the best elements of like Red Sparrow that they really didn't do. The shooting was actually pretty interesting. I'm like, whoa, that's like actually a real landscape. And that's like a real stunt they did. Holy shit. I thought that this way more so than Falcon Winter Soldier was borrowing from the Winter Soldier School of Acting. And they did, if not for the fact that they had literally the exact same problem that Shang-Chi did, which is where as soon as it got into the third act, it lost me. It's crazy because like people have been talking about the CG-filled Marvel third acts for a long time, like almost the entirety of the run of the first 3 phases. And I never really understood it, and it never really bothered me until this phase, specifically between this movie and Shang-Chi, where the third act, I'm like, okay, so I should preface with this. I think the first 2 acts of this movie are legit amazing. I really, really do. I think the character work, it's like, wow, this is everything that we would expect from like a solo Scarlett Johansson run Black Widow. And the fact that they're like not playing this up for like anything gimmicky. They're playing it like John Wick. They're playing it straight. They're showing her as like a real human being. Like she's watching 80s comedies that like quoting them. I'm like, yes, like this is all the shit that we could have possibly wanted. Like this is what people wanted from this. Yeah, it sucks. It's better late than never, but like better late than never is a thing, you know? And even like with the expansion of her family, obviously we get the introduction to Florence Pugh, who is, if her performance in Hawkeye is anything to be evidence, it's that she is definitely going to carry the mantra of that character very far into the future, but also give us something really interesting and different than what Johansson brought us, Natasha. Obviously the introduction of her parents as well, played deliciously campy and over the top by Dave Harbour and Rachel Weisz. The thing that tortures this movie is the third act. Like it really, really is. Like I honestly think that it's crazy to think about, but like at the very least, Shang-Chi, as crazy and overly bombastic as Shang-Chi's third act is, it makes sense for that world that it takes place in. Black Widow is like, okay, this is pretty street level. This is pretty like standard, like Sabotage-esque. But you want to talk about the mother of all jumping the sharks, jumping the guns, when they fly to a freaking giant like space satellite. That's like 3 Justice League Watchtowers mixed into one, and that's where they've been hiding the entire time. I'm like, okay, I know that helicarriers exist in this world, and I get this is Marvel, but like that was the point where it lost me. The Taskmaster stuff, which is like pretty cool, pretty Jason Bourne-esque, that was kind of middling near the end, especially once it became very obvious where they were pushing the twist, and it commits the cardinal prequel sin of ending, oh, this is where this character is going to go into this next movie, and if anything, it just makes the Black Widow death even more depressing. To me, the only redeeming factor that came from the end of this and that awful third act was the post-credit scene, which almost got killed by Julie Louis-Dreyfus in her second of 2 awful, like, property torching performances this year in Marvel properties. But yeah, Black Widow. So for the first 2 acts being as good as they were, only for it to be as plummeted as hard as it was in its third act, that's why it's number 6. Number 5, controversial choice, which I know a lot of people. This to me was the equivalent of the Star Wars prequels because people were so sucked into it and invested in it every single minute that it was on because it was the only thing to watch during the pandemic. And then they kind of went into hating it after the finale. And just like everything that speeds up during the internet age, it picked up and people have largely come around. And my number 5 is WandaVision. And I feel like number 5 is the perfect spot for it. For me personally, I don't know how many other people will agree for it because it is literally right in the middle. It has such a great concept and the idea for homages to old school television as far as a representation for this new character who was not originally supposed to be the debut outing for MCU's Phase 4 and kind of new emergence and direction away from kind of Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., and Thanos. And again, like it's the kind of the process that comes by. It's a week by week thing that is a return to form for a property that was out of people's lives for a year, was kind of restoring that old school television mentality, reinforced by old school TV tropes, while also playing up the J.J. Abrams kind of underlying mystery box element of it all. That is an amazing concept for just suckering people in for television. And like the amount of like kind of what I like to call like the levels of breaking the fourth wall that are going through you, you know, I'll call it like incepting the metaverse. I'll use that phrase to describe it, that is going on with this show. This should have been great. But ultimately, just from a story standpoint, for its third act to really kind of be disappointing, really be middling, kind of just flake on a lot of the interesting mysteries that they set up. You know, I'm not going to go into the specifics as far as just from a comic standpoint from the X-Men, but just as a storytelling decision, the Evan Peters twist is pretty poor. It's pretty poor. Once again, it is the definition of an idea that was almost a little bit too big for what it was ultimately going for. I think it maybe should have pulled back on one of the elements. That being said, everything else that goes into the show is amazing. Like I would make the argument to say that money well spent for the show. I definitely think that the look of it was amazing, even at points better than Loki, which definitely had some of the best effects just in general on the MCU this year. Oh, good. Matt's chiming in. And what's it called? The effects and like kind of the amount of work and detail that is done into making each of those sets look exactly like the television setting in which they're paying homage to is amazing. The costume design, particularly in the Halloween episode, I thought was really cool. I love how each of the properties have been like doing these different twists on like the original costumes that they had. And then the final episode comes, kind of reveals all the twists that you had kind of already guessed on by that point, and then is like, okay, now you're just gonna get the usual MCU throwing fireballs at each other thing, and also having the villain be a direct ripoff of the main hero. It really sucks because it's one of those things where it's like, again, ideas, it was almost there, but just the final finished product just wasn't quite it. That's why I did only end up giving it 3 stars. That being said, again, Emmy nominations well earned, if not for the fact that Elizabeth Olsen was also competing against 2 of the other best female performances of that television time period, with Anya Taylor-Joy and Queen's Gambit and Kate Winslet for Mare of Easttown. I would say she definitely would have deserved it, because this is easily her best outing within the MCU from an acting standpoint. We got the most introspective of her character, who I've always thought was an interesting character, and I thought even to an extent more than Black Widow was a female character that definitely should have gotten some further examination, just because of how interesting of an by nature that character is. Paul Bettany crushes it as Vision as always, because he's just that good with the character, because he's been with that role that long, and the supporting cast all around them really interesting. So that's why it sits square in the middle at 5. Number 4 is Hawkeye. Man, I'm chalking this one up to recency bias, and just the fact that because of how immediately unsatisfying most of the MCU things have been, especially since we literally only got the last episode like today when this is airing. But I love this show. This show to me was everything that I feel like the MCU has been trying with each of their different television properties throughout. It's really interesting how like they kind of all pay homage. And this to me, again, it was a schmaltzy, not caring at all about its tone. Sure, it had some serious moments in there, but the serious moments were all kind of in homage to like the overall goofy nature. And what this was to me, sure, it was a typical like action Christmas story, but also this was to me like probably my favorite origin story movie that we got of this year, you know, because I'm like, look, what you're doing is you're kind of giving this swan song to this character who for the longest time has almost kind of been like a joke in the MCU, as far not because of his actual character, but just because of like his usage rate, like the decision that it's like, okay, alongside all these other characters, you're going to have a dude who shoots bow and arrow. Like the idea is in and of itself inherently hilarious. And Jeremy Renner's commitment and just absolute like embracing of that character in literally only 4 MCU movies. Like that's the thing that's crazy, is he's an original founding Avenger, but he's got the same amount of movies as say, and runtime as say like Doctor Strange or Wanda or Black Panther, or like one of the new big characters, or like with one of the other supporting characters. He's ultimately a supporting character. And for him to prove how good he is just with leading this show, while also having Haley Steinfeld crush it alongside him so hard as she is, like this is a performance and a role with this kind of a tone that should not work. That should be ingratiating, it should be annoying, but she sells it super hard, but just with a mastery of tone that ultimately, again, like very few actors would be able to handle. The supporting cast, this one definitely has, like, I would say probably the weakest supporting cast. I think the best parts are like the tracksuit mafia, who are all like kind of just like regular average Joes. The parts of it were a little bit too comedic for me. I also did like what Tony Dalton was doing, how they kind of set him up as a villain, and then they're like, nope, he's just a goof who like happens to be really good at swordplay. I thought that like just everything about it, like tone wise to me, just worked, as far as like, okay, it really, I feel like the argument as far as like kind of it not like feeling as serious, I don't necessarily know if that argument applies, because unlike most other MCU properties that state themselves to be serious at first and then kind of just end up having and then what's it called, and then just have it, and then just end up having a kind of an average run of the mill third act. It's like, no, that this actually did set itself up as far as what exactly it was going for. Like, it is this schmaltzy kind of cutesy tone. It's got dark undersellings, but it's not focusing on them. It's just using them as interesting pathos to fuel the characters and their motivations. I thought it was great. I'll definitely give you guys this. It was definitely another unsatisfying kind of lackluster finale. I definitely thought the Kingpin usage rate, big mistake on their parts as far as if they did, but they could also be doing a different story direction. But that for me is why it rests solely at number 4. So we're going into it. Final 3 time, people. What's it called? Like I said, we've got what's it called? Oh, okay. So Matt has joined the chat and he's given off his official rankings. So I'll read that out. Number 9, Hawkeye. Ronan equals wasted. Number 8, What If? Strange carried. 7, Black Widow. Too late. 6, Eternals. Right ideas, horrible execution. 5, WandaVision, different aesthetic, might age good over time. 4, Shang-Chi, solid fun. Nice. I love the little descriptions too there, Matt. Keep it coming. Ultimately, I'm loving the chat interaction tonight. This has been a lot of fun. So just to recap, everyone's 4 through 6. Eric's number 6 is Hawkeye. Number 5 is What If. And number 4 is Eternals. Eli's number 6, also Hawkeye. Number 5, also What If. And number 4, Loki. And then my 4 through 6 got Black Widow at 6, WandaVision at 5, and Hawkeye at 4. We're getting into it, people. We're on the final 3 time right about now. We're going to run through our 3s and our 2s right before we settle on what I think is not only our 3s, but also pretty universally like the most well-received of the MCU properties released in 2021. So starting off, Eric, what is your number 3, followed by your number 2?
Okay, so all these top 3 actually I think are pretty strong, and my number 3 though is Loki. And yeah, basically like with this one, I think going in, I think right out of the gate, almost similar to Shang-Chi, it seems like a lot of people were hyping this up as like, oh, this is one of the best things Marvel's ever done, like right out of the gate. So I was a bit like, I think almost cynical on it at first. And then as it kept going around like the midway point, I don't know, I thought the last 3 episodes were definitely the best, some of the best kind of episodes they've done so far in these Marvel shows. And I do think without a doubt it had the best finale of all the Marvel shows. And I mean, to part of that though, I think it's a bit unfair to compare in a way because it is getting a season 2, so it gets more of like a traditional season finale is the ending. So it's like ends like leaving wanting you more, and it's not just like, okay, that's it. So it makes it a bit easier to swallow some kind of dangling plot threads, I think. But yeah, ultimately, like I guess if they were ever going to do a show or a movie or whatever where they made one of their villains the protagonist, obviously Loki was the one to do it with. And because he is, I don't even know, he's not like, I think he's the second best villain in the MCU after Thanos, but as a character overall, I think I'd put him above Thanos because he has gone through just like so many different kind of stages and like who he's like, I guess, loyal to and whatnot. And yeah, I was skeptical going in, but they really did kind of make it work, and they make it like this whole kind of like metaphor almost for like what it is, like what destiny kind of even means, and if you're like fated to kind of just like be a piece in this puzzle, like or can you like forge your own destiny. And that was, I don't know, I thought that was, they were really like kind of doing interesting things with it. It really is unlike anything else in the MCU, I would say. And yeah, it just goes, it gets really weird and wild. It's definitely like one of kind of the more out there MCU things, and I love just the whole aesthetic of the TVA and everything. Like how it's kind of like almost kind of dated looking, but it's this like, I guess it has like this kind of timeless quality to it because it is like, obviously they're in charge of time. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was, in the end, it was really cool. And I thought, I actually felt for Loki, and I thought the characters, like even other than Loki, like Mobius, like Owen Wilson, and then Lady Loki, who I'm actually blanking on. Yeah, Sylvie. Yeah, by the end, like I liked her as well. I thought they had like just a lot of interesting dynamics, and Judge Renslayer and whatnot. Like, yeah, it had a really cool atmosphere, and I'm like really excited to see where it will like kind of go in the next season. So that's my number 3. And I almost at one point after probably would have had it even higher, but ultimately, the next one, I would say I just had a better time on the journey overall. And I guess so. Yeah, my number two, the one I'm talking about, is WandaVision. And so WandaVision, I've got to say, I know it's pretty split. But I was one of those people going into this. This was like about on par with what we have at number one. And for me, excitement wise, actually going into it, of all the shows right out of the gate, this was like just the one that intrigued me the most. Because like you, Dom, I actually did always find Wanda and Vision kind of interesting characters I wanted to know more about. And just like I think this one even had the kind of upper hand in being like the first of this whole phase. So like after all this long time, and it was just I think it was such a cool way to start phase four. How you're just kind of thrown into the middle of it and you don't know kind of how this has happened or not. Like I like that it wasn't like just spoon fed to you right away. And I do think the finale's a bit of a letdown, but I still think other than Loki, it's my favorite of the finales still. I think it's a letdown compared to how good the rest of the show was, but I still think it ties up a lot and I still have hope that some things could be resolved maybe in Multiverse of Madness that were kind of dangling threads, like maybe even the Ralph Boner thing could be amended. I don't know. But I will admit that that's still a bit hard to process that they like just decided to make that whole thing a boner
Yeah.
joke.
Well, not even that, just the stunt casting in and of itself. Like you do like that specific, like Marvel is particularly struck out this year when it comes to the stunt casting, both between Evan Peters for the Quicksilver sub in. It's like really, so if he's just a regular dude, but you're gonna obviously hoodwink both her and the audience. Like that's one of those like Marvel fucking with the audience occasionally that I can never get behind because it's just confusing, like to figure out where the decision comes from. And yeah, so moving on to Eli, your number three and number two.
Yeah, so this one might be a little more controversial, but at number three, I do have Shang-Chi or Shang-Chi, however you want to pronounce it. I personally actually had fun with this movie. I'm well aware of the issues, and I actually debated a lot between this one and Loki, where I would put it. I think it just came down to the experience. I definitely had more fun with Shang-Chi than I did with Loki. Despite the third act being what it was, I thought some of the effects were still pretty cool. I did enjoy the Mandarin as a villain. I thought he was actually one of the better villains in the MCU. I would at least put him in top five around there. I did like that he actually had like a real motivation for what he's doing, and even though he was flawed, I did like that. I am a sucker for a decent villain. And just I did like the fight choreography. I don't think that really gets talked about enough. Before the crazy stuff, especially that first fight on the bus before it gets chopped in half and becomes, just generic Marvel fight. I did think the fight choreographing was actually pretty good, and I don't think it gets enough credit for that. They did do a pretty good job with the action in this movie, I would say. Overall, I did enjoy it. It was a pretty fun experience. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'll leave it at that. We can maybe dive into a little more with the rankings, because I'm kind of going up against you guys 2-1 in terms of your placements, but
Not quite,
yeah.
not quite.
I mean, I think you're actually probably the one with. I think I'm the one with the hot take on that. I think most people probably would have agreed with you, honestly. So
I'm with you. There are a couple people, not many vocally, but there are a couple who are like kind of on the same levels. Like, yeah, Shang-Chi's not really all that.
Yeah, and like I said, common theme. I did like a lot of the ideas. It just like it kind of felt like they had just too much in the movie to like properly like do everything well, if that makes sense. I honestly think Shang-Chi would have benefited more from being a TV show than an actual movie. I think because of everything they were trying to introduce, and it just the pacing was a little quick at times, so there is that. But yeah, moving on from that, I put WandaVision also at number two. I honestly didn't think the finale was bad. Of course, it was just like MCU kind of. There wasn't like a huge twist, obviously, but I didn't think it was bad by any means. I did think it was pretty, at least satisfactory for Wanda's arc. How I thought her final goodbye to Vision was pretty emotional. Obviously, there's the whole thing with the White Vision being out there now, and I'm curious to see what they do with that moving forward. But I thought the first like 6, 7 episodes were phenomenal. I really liked how Eric said, just like it was just a different formula than what we're used to in the MCU. And I think it's a great way to start phase four, showing like, hey, we're trying new things. This is really different. We're just chucking you right into the middle of something, and you actually have to kind of figure out the pieces yourself until some of the big reveals. And I really like that. And as you were saying, Don, like no, it was Eric, sorry, but the set designs, the costume designs, I thought everything was like still great. Even someone I'm not too familiar with the comics, but I was still able to spot the fan service when it popped up, and I could appreciate that. And I thought they did a really great job with WandaVision, apart from maybe the finale, which I still don't think was that bad personally.
All right. Good to know. All right. So we got Shang-Chi, WandaVision. We got what's it called? We got Shang-Chi. Yeah, for God, click the wrong one. Then we got Loki and WandaVision. So going into mine, number 3, I don't care if I am the only person that has it this high, because obviously, we know that I'm an animation junkie. We know that first and foremost. It's why I have Spider-Verse as my number 1 for Spider-Man. But like, it wasn't just the animation that got me, and I'll tell you why. So my number 3 is What If, and the reason being, it's another one. It's like, I get everyone's problems with it. I really do, because they are problems. But for this to be kind of Marvel's take on like Rod Stewart, Twilight Zone-esque Black Mirror, not really Black Mirror, because Black Mirror doesn't really have any sort of interconnectiveness, where it's literally, to me, kind of what was the only real vested interest that I had in the MCU post Endgame, because at the time, Endgame felt like such an awesome like conclusion. Like, it felt like a Return of the King. It felt like a Deathly Hallows. It felt like that one thing. It's like, okay, that's the sacred property. That's the end of the story. You don't touch or go past it. And I think it's kind of like part of that baggage that was prevented me from like enjoying a lot of the other MCU stuff that came out this past year that I didn't enjoy as much at first, that I ended up really, really liking later on. But this show, I was sold on the concept immediately. I thought the promotion was great. I thought the marketing was great. I'm like, oh, Jeffrey Wright's sweet pipes voicing the Watcher. Let's go. As he's just narrating kind of and overseeing these random events that are just happening throughout the course of the multiverse. I thought it was, if anything, I thought that it was like the best as far as like kind of just showing all the different multiple worlds and multiple storylines, and just showing just like what the MCU is capable of with the multiverse. I think it did that great. The biggest criticism obviously goes towards the handling of the individual episodes. Obviously, in any sort of an anthologically based episode, it's just a matter of fact, you're going to have better episodes than others. So that didn't really bother me as much. For me, the biggest source of annoyance came from the fact that, because they were essentially attempting to tell like stories on the level of their movies, but crammed into like some 20 to 30, sometimes 40-minute long episodes, by nature of the beast, they're going to feel rushed. And a lot of the endings are specifically, like, I was particularly annoyed by the fact that they all ended on cliffhangers until the resolution. And I think that's what kind of tripped a lot of people up, is the fact that it felt for so long like it was anthology based, at least for the first 7 episodes. They briefly hinted, obviously, at the pretend, like, quote unquote, the literal breaking of the fourth wall when Strange Supreme communicates with the Watcher in the 4th episode. But how this ended up being another MCU interconnected thing, where he just ended up like assembling all in bits and pieces from the storylines across the different episodes, I actually thought was pretty cool, honestly. And I really, really dug what they did with the Infinite Ultron character. Ross Marquand, once again, lending his amazing, impersonation skills. He did it first with Red Skull in Infinity War, and now he did it with Ultron in this, and it was amazing every time. Although this time is a little bit more obvious that it wasn't James Spader, because James Spader is a very, very unique, just tonal cadence and what have you. And so I think that's what threw a lot of the people off. But I definitely think, just like as an interesting experiment and something that was kind of different, that actually felt and looked different for Marvel, I also think that like kind of the fact that they still held over a majority of the cast, I thought was actually pretty cool. Honestly, I know it was distracting for a lot of people, especially because obviously they didn't bring back the big ones. They didn't bring back the big 3 that died in Endgame, and they didn't bring back any of the Guardians of the Galaxy or a few of them. But the fact that they got a majority of the voices, and specifically a couple of voiceover actors that I thought like sounded exactly like the people, like the dude that they got to play Spider-Man. I literally had to make sure that wasn't Tom Holland. It sounded exactly like him. But I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was really new. It was a lot of different. Marvel's a company that likes to tote that they introduce new things, when a lot of the time they don't. But this was the first thing that actually felt kind of new and interesting and in a different direction for them. It's easily some of the darkest stuff that I've seen in the MCU just in general, and I really enjoyed it. My number 2 is, as I block this spam comment, my number 2 what's it called? My number 2 is Loki. This is my favorite of the live action shows that we got this year, easily. It is just the most fun. It was the most daring. It was the most bombastic. Sci-fi, and ironically enough, I feel like has gone farther as far as its relatability to people in TV than it has in film. obviously between Star Trek and obviously you saw what happened this year, like what Apple's kind of do in order to try and like expand into what's it called, as far as kind of trying to expand into different areas of sci-fi. I thought the show handled that really well, on top of the fact that Loki is always low-key been one of my favorite characters in the entirety of the MCU. I think his usage rate across the entirety of the MCU has been just perfect, because he's not overused in a ton of things. So then when he does pop up, he makes something just that more special. Like he's the best part about Dark World. Obviously, his back and forth with Thor was one of the highlights of Ragnarok, and then his death being one of the kickoffs, one of like the 15 kickoffs that happened at the beginning of Infinity War to make that movie as awesome as it was. You know, it's interesting because of all the shows that were going to come out, I was the most worried about this one, because I'm like, this is the cheapest as far as starting out, because they cheapen what I thought was actually a really impactful death in Infinity War. Ironically enough, one of 3 of the most impactful MCU deaths we've ever gotten that all happened in Infinity War between Loki, Vision, and Gamora. And obviously, I was kind of okay with Vision and Gamora, because I'm like, okay, Vision's an android. They can always rebuild him. And Gamora, they're going to do some timey-wimey stuff to resolve her in Guardians 3, and it's going to be amazing. But Loki, I was the most not sold on, because I'm like, wow, okay, they already kind of undercut the death in Endgame with the time travel gimmick with the Tesseract. And then for the story to actually be like really compelling, it's kind of like, I'm like, oh, okay, now he's like almost kind of cursed, because he's forced to like almost like view the events of his life as like this own television show, and then kind of like understand like, and it would, and like how this kind of, I don't even want to say CIA, because they don't even seem that particularly efficient. I'm trying to think of like a less efficient government agency that kind of monitors literally all of reality. It was, again, between that and What If, I thought they were both the best introductions to just the multiverse and what it's capable of, and the different timelines that you can go in. As far as the time travel stuff, look, you're going to have time travel problems in literally every single property that gets made now. So I feel like to kind of complain and nitpick about that. It's like, dude, that goes all the way back to the Future. It's just the nature of time traveling storytelling. There's always going to be problems because of all the different possibilities that are literally possible. And the MCU kind of already fucked up with time travel once. And this being their attempt to like kind of course correct that is almost hilarious. And that's before we even get into the probability. We realize that like kind of the entire of the multiverse just spawned from this one dude. And it's Jonathan Majors, who gives not the performance that I thought was going to come out of the dude who's playing Kang the Conqueror, but ended up being like the performance that we kind of all needed, because this kind of being like the role it sold him is like, okay, this is going to be the next like big bad of the MCU. I thought it was really, really well handled. I think of all the shows that had like kind of the 6-episode structure of like a movie spread out across 6 episodes, I think this one easily handled the best. I thought it had the best pacing. I thought it had the best thrills. I thought it had the most fun, the biggest, the loudest moments. And yeah, I thought it handled it amazingly well. So Loki, number 2. And so I just wanted to go over a couple comments before we all go into our number 1, which everybody here knows what that is. But Matt, as what's it called? So Matt, overall, a mid-year, but No Way Home made him feel like a kid again, and got him back invested in the MCU. Dylan Sharp, all of them have fans. Ronan Wasted, how? John commenting, I've really been listening to this while playing zombies at around 35 now, so I had to be almost an hour enjoying the lists. Wow. Well, my question is, how, John, are you going to be, have you actually been paying attention? You've been playing zombies for this last bit, but I'm going to read Matt's 3 through 1, because that's going to lead into our number 1. Number 3, Loki, enjoyed, might be the best series, needs a rewatch. 2, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, sucker for characters, could have been way better. And number 1, which of course is all of our number 1s. It is literally everyone that has watched this movie's number 1. Some people have even considered it to be the best MCU movie ever, which is baffling to me. But it is, of course, Spider-Man No Way Home. Yeah, of course, there's a little bit of recency bias in here, but let's face it, we all love this movie. This truly was the movie of the year in a year that desperately needed a movie event like this as an entire homage. I mean, I've already basically talked about this movie like a shit ton on 2 different podcasts now, but just go around the board, guys. Like, why is Spider-Man No Way Home it's just the best? It's the best. Whoever wants to go first, speak now for a roll of peace.
I thought this movie just hit everything across the board. I honestly was a little skeptical just after the year the MCU's had. I don't know. I don't know if I've been like overly critical. I just haven't been a huge fan of everything that's come out this year. So for me, this movie really was kind of like make or break, or whether like I continue my investment within the MCU. And I got to say, it definitely kept me invested. I think I don't even know where to begin, to be honest. I loved all the character arcs. I think, especially Andrew Garfield, I thought he was phenomenal in this movie. I liked how he finally got his redemption for, his failed attempt to save Gwen and the Amazing Spider-Man 2. And how he never really got to finish his trilogy, and this is kind of like the unofficial way for him to wrap that up. And Tobey Maguire obviously loved seeing him, and feels like he hasn't like even changed one bit from the role, even though it's been like what 20 years now, which is, I don't know, that just baffled me. But I thought every character was basically a step up in this movie. I thought Tom Holland, this was by far his best performance. You could see like, just the whole weight of, his consequences and everything really getting to him. And I think his performance was just fantastic and a great representation of what like a kid would be going through in this like world breaking situation. I also thought Zendaya was like, this is my personal favorite performance of Zendaya as MJ. I wasn't a huge fan of her character in the first two movies in this trilogy, but I felt like she actually was like a real human in this one. I don't know, but that's my own. I just wasn't a fan of her in the first few, but I really did like her in this one. Special effects obviously going to be amazing, and the villains, I thought that was honestly my favorite part. I thought obviously the Green Goblin, how I just was not expecting him to just return to being the menace that he was, and he's phenomenal. Same with Doc Ock. I thought it was a great path for him to go down, and just everything about this movie I absolutely loved. I also loved the messaging and how Peter ended up having to Tom Holland's Peter had to make the ultimate sacrifice in the end, and it was very emotional, and I just loved it.
Yeah, Eric, I mean, come on, man. I know you've been waiting to talk about this one.
Yeah, so I think it's not just the fact that it actually delivers on pretty much everything we wanted, but it's the fact that it does it in a way that it actually like just works so well and flows so well as a movie. I would say I really like the only other one I can think of that has as like kind of solid a pacing in the MCU is probably Infinity War. Like, and it's around the same length. Both those movies are like just something important happening like all the time. There's really like no fat or anything in either of those movies. So I think it gave me a similar vibe to that. Not quite as dark as Infinity War, but still one of the darker MCU's movies for sure, which actually surprised me because as much as they were hyping up all these things, I was still a little skeptical because I'm like, okay, but this is still like the exact same team that made Homecoming and Far From Home, which I liked well enough, but they're really just like, they almost feel like Disney Channel movies with like a huge budget. But this one, yeah, it really went places, and I guess I think it proved me wrong because I was excited for it, but I was kind of skeptical going in, and but yeah, like Eli was saying, like just the fact of how the characters that returned from the previous like pre-MCU Spider-Man movies, like how much they still feel like they just played these characters yesterday, kind of. That was just really impressive in and of itself, and it's just really cool to see them like how Lizard and Electro are talking because they're from the same universe and they're kind of figuring out what's going on, and then the Rami villains are talking. And I did have some issues coming out of it, but like they were all kind of questions on, okay, how exactly does this work, or how, okay, but like, so why did these guys come back right before they died, but then the other Spider-Mans come back just from like present time, it seems like, from where they are in real time.
Well,
I don't know.
If I can only introduce like one caveat to that, which it took me until the second time to watch this to realize this, but I realized that the two other the Garfield and Maguire were both pulled into that universe at the same time that the villains were. They had just spent like the whole first 2 acts of the movie just like wandering around, not finding like anything. Like they were trying to find Peter, but like who knows what city they may have even been brought to, So that's the only thing. Like, and it's crazy too because I think that's a problem that a lot of other people had with kind of when they were brought into the movie, and I think that's why. It's because like that's the thing that like I guess the movie forgot to kind of clue us into.
Yeah, no, like that's the thing. I could like I was thinking of all these things at the first time. I did see it 3 times, but and I think the second and third time I liked it more even than the first time. The first time I was just like processing what I saw. And then ultimately I realized most of those things I was thinking of, they don't really matter because very few MCU movies don't have at least something like that. And like literally, like I was saying, like literally the only one I'd say Infinity War I think is the best MCU movie overall. But like, so other than that one I really have nothing wrong with it. But other than that, like, yeah, I can see now after rewatching it, I'm like, yeah, it is arguably like maybe my second favorite, or like it's really up there. And it's nice having that favor like of non-MCU movies in an MCU movie come into it, and it did feel like true kind of continuations, like even Andrew Garfield's kind of type of awkwardness and Tobey Maguire's type of awkwardness. Like that's the thing I realized why it works so well, because like even though some of their movies are hit or miss, like all the Spider-Mans, the actors
How
do
dare
like
you, sir?
really,
The Andrew Garfield movies are amazing and underrated.
yeah, I think the first one's really good. The second
Oh,
one,
I was talking about 2. I was talking about Amazing Spider-Man 2.
yeah, I mean,
First one's whatever. First one can go away.
like
Amazing Spider-Man 2, that's where it's at.
it has some of the best moments, I think, but I just think it also has like the worst villains in the whole franchise.
What? Amazing Spider-Man 2? You know what? I can't even justify Paul Giamatti or Dane DeHaan. You're right. You know what? Those two are pretty indefensible. I'll give you that.
And then like the fact Jamie Foxx is like, he's pretty much like Riddler in Batman Forever. It's like he's not good by any means, but
and
I see
Riddler
why.
in Batman Forever was good. It's misunderstood.
He was good compared to Two-Face, but I don't know if he was like that good.
I can't defend Two-Face. I don't know what Tommy Lee Jones was doing in that.
Yeah, like I think that, yeah, okay, I don't want to go too much off topic.
I love it. Keep it going.
But yeah, just the fact that like I can see why, absolutely, though, that's the villain they picked from that movie, because he was the least horrible. Like, because the other two were just like, I don't want to see those two again. Like
they didn't have a lot. They didn't have a lot of good stuff to work with.
Like I would have rather seen like Topher Grace's Venom back than those guys.
Damn.
Like, so I mean, yeah, but just the way they made it all work, it was just really, it impressed me. It impresses me the more I think about it. Like it's tough for me to say if it's my favorite movie of the year or not. I don't know. I'm like a huge James Bond fan, so my heart kind of belongs to that movie since I spent like $300 on this box set.
Oh yeah, as you told me, that's yeah. I'm like, wow, okay, $300 for.
But I mean, yeah, this has just been a fantastic year for movies, in my opinion. It's about like it's kind of like a three-way tie between, for me personally, and obviously it's different for different people, but for me, between like No Time to Die, Spider-Man No Way Home, and the Snyder Cut are sort of all like in this like really close battle they're all like really just epic feeling movies, which I felt like really satisfied by. So I was just impressed that we got that with this movie, because I rewatched all the other Spider-Man movies, right? And I do think on rewatch, the Tom Holland ones they're not bad, but they are like kind of, depending on your taste, they can be a bit boring when you've seen them a couple times, I guess. And but just, yeah, the fact, just seeing Toby and Andrew and like, yeah, the fact, okay, one thing, sorry, I rambled, but I think the cool thing, which I'm not the first person to say this by any means, but just the fact that when you kind of realize this actually is the end of an origin story, this is really the end of Tom Holland's Spider-Man origin story, and he's really only truly become like Spider-Man the way Toby and Andrew were at the end of this movie, I think. And that we never really know what happened with Uncle Ben. We assumed he got killed, but it didn't seem like he gave Peter the talk that seemed to make him Spider-Man the way the other two had. And so the fact that then, I don't know, for all we know, maybe he just got sick and died and didn't learn any life lessons or anything from him. And
from what I heard, it was they kind of just watch sci-fi movies together.
Oh, okay, yeah, but then it's Aunt May, and like, yeah, that was, even the way they do that scene, like it really messed with you, like how you think she's okay, and then she's not, and like Eli was saying, yeah, I already kind of got to the villains, but just the fact of how, especially Green Goblin, like yeah, he is really back in full force, and I gotta say, like I think he's scarier in this than he was in the original Spider-Man.
Oh, for sure.
Like, and even I think they gave him like kind of a new score, or like a new musical score this time around. That like
they ribbed with the original Elfman score a little bit. I know for a fact they did.
Yeah, no, but I think there was like something like new on. I don't know. I could be imagining it. I felt like there was something new on top of that for him specifically, not for Toby. I mean, not just the old Spider-Man score, but like for Green Goblin. Like when he turns on them and he's like throwing Spider-Man through the floor. Like it's like, oh man, this got really dark. Like this. I'm a little shocked that the guy who gave us Homecoming and Far From Home is giving us this now. So yeah, my opinion on John Watts definitely went up. So yeah, I think that's sums up mostly my thoughts on why it's number one. But I will say, as you know, I loved WandaVision though too. So I almost had that at number one. But ultimately, I think that one, from just a filmmaking standpoint, is kind of more fascinating. But I will say this one just there's nothing really all the ways that matters. It like kind of delivers and satisfies, whereas WandaVision doesn't quite get there in some ways. So yeah, I was almost I don't know if I just thought I'm gonna be a contrarian and put WandaVision number one, but
Nah, you're
ultimately
fine.
ultimately I think I couldn't really deny. I think as much as I want to like say, oh, there's like this doesn't totally make sense or whatever, but like the way they delivered it delivered on every kind of aspect that really mattered, I think.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, John just commented again and was like, it's a second best of all time. Infinity War at first and Endgame at third. John, you're high. I'm just saying it right now. You are high. It for me, it's like at like it just like out edges Age of Ultron the more I think about it for my 10 personally. But yeah, like I mean, oh, No Way Home. Yeah. Oh, definitely. What's it called? No, I would still put all the Avengers minus Age of Ultron, Civil War, the first two Guardians, the first Iron Man, and Black Panther all over and Winter Soldier all over this one for me.
I mean,
For sure.
for me, there's like I said, Infinity War is definitely number one, and then there's like 5 or 6 between like
Right.
including one of those would
But
be
don't
like
get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. This is
they're all like interchangeable.
Don't get me wrong. This one's pretty high for sure. Like this movie, just from a pacing standpoint, like this movie has no slow points, no fat on it. It takes off like a rocket from the first minute. It's literally like picks up right where Far From Home left off. And I think, and it just does not stop until the end. I think ultimately my reason for why I enjoy this movie so much more than the first two, in addition to just enjoying it as much as I did, because like coming out of this movie, like it was pretty apparent that like a lot of people were gonna love it, and I'm like, okay. And what they got right to me was that they actually made a Spider-Man movie, and what I mean by that is this is probably for me since the Raimi movies the most comically accurate like depiction of just Spider-Man, where the Homecoming, you've still got a little bit of like kind of the Iron Man underlying, and like they have like a theme about like kind of working class versus elite, kind of an underlying little thing there. Far From Home is just a goofy, like Disney Channel-esque adventure. They've literally got like Disney Channel level jokes in there. It's completely nonsensical. The villain in and of itself is a joke character, which it kind of works, but also is a little bit in a little bit of disgracing towards the character. In hindsight, I couldn't think of a better, more descriptive word here, but here they are just firing on all cylinders. They've got the full comic book nature out. You've got dimension hopping. You've got pulling in other villains. You've got actual like legitimate stakes that come back to haunt the character, which is like a cornerstone of Spider-Man storytelling just in general. You've got the fun sidekicks that also give great mentorship and advice. You have him like teaming up with other heroes. You get Daredevil and Doctor Strange in this movie, which is mind blowing. So like from that sense, I absolutely get why people would put this on the level of say like an Infinity War or an Endgame. And that's like right in there. To me, ironically enough, the thing that holds this back from being that good, even though it's easily the best of this batch, the thing that for me makes it that good, but also kind of holds it back in a way, is the behind the scenes producerial angle of it, where again, this is a win for both Sony and Disney, where Sony finally gets to market up and make their previous films continuity within Disney canon, while at the same time kind of giving us the fans that that resolution that we never got from the previous two Spider-Man franchises, both because of how they kind of left off with Tony just being unable to tie it together, all those loose threads. But at the same time, it's also like just for people like me who are looking behind the scenes, it's like, oh, they're only in the movie because of this, and this. And if anything, it kind of makes the behind the scenes things even funnier, because while it's very apparent that it's very apparent that Jamie Foxx, Alfred Molina, and Willem Dafoe were like all there and all on set, it was very apparent that like the one day that they had with Thomas Hayden Church and Rice Ifans, they were literally like just had them do the one scene in front of the green screen with like the camera super zoomed in so that you wouldn't tell that they were like not on set with the rest of them, and then like just had them do voiceover for like playing entirely CG characters. Like, hey, Marvel knows what it's doing, and again, like how Marvel balances out this massive amount of characters. Like, it's not quite to the level of like Infinity War with how many characters it has on screen, but this movie has a lot of characters on screen, and like John Watts definitely pulled a lot from the Russos as far as how to balance out like the screen time with all the characters in general, but it was done amazingly well. This is Tom Holland's best performance in the entire MCU. I'll say that again. It's his most compelling. It's him at his lowest, and the balance again, I haven't even gotten to Andrew and Toby yet because of how much that goes into this movie. But the balancing act that this movie pulls with all the characters, kind of the usage rate, what I like to call, I think it's a video game term, and then I'm going to kind of apply here, like the usage rate of each of the characters was exactly where it needed to be. You know, the Doctor Strange usage rate wasn't too high. The villain usage rate, like we got to, and it's funny because like I'm waiting. I'm like, okay, how are they going to shortchange? How are they interchange? Which one of the villains is not going to have as much screen time? And they still give like enough screen time to all of them, while same time like having Green Goblin be the standout. And of course, like I knew Defoe was going to crush because it's Defoe. He's finally starting to get like kind of the mainstream recognition that he deserves, that he just continually crushes time and time again. And I'm so glad that he almost like that, like again, like ironically enough, like the first villain ever introduced in a live action Spider-Man film, and he ends up being the best part about this movie. And just everything about this movie just worked. It was firing, even the parts that didn't work, you can like find ways around, because it's like it's one of the first MCU movies in a while where you can like chalk the quote unquote problems with the film to like legitimate character choices that like make sense when you put yourself in the character shoes. Which is again, like to quote Chris when we on our Spider-Man podcast that we did earlier this week, what films are supposed to do. Like I think a great term that he came up with is like great films make you feel like you're having a conversation with the auteur. And like I usually never credit one of these individual directors only because the way that the usage rate of these directors is kind of as TV directors, so it's not necessarily like the traditionalist term of a director where it's their unique vision that they're bringing to this property. In a way, the Bond franchise kind of works in a similar way, but not quite. So for me, again, it's like as Kevin Feige, I call this like the coming together. Kevin Feige, Amy Pascal over at Sony. You know, Avi Arad, who was the producer that was in charge of all the previous Spider-Man films and whose dream it was to see the Sinister Six put on screen. Tried it twice, couldn't make it work. But this movie did. And obviously the ghost of Stan Lee. I could feel his presence all throughout this movie, even though he obviously couldn't be in the film. And it was just amazing. It honestly, for me personally, one of the best MCU third acts in a long time, because for the first time you actually like, you knew every character on screen, and it wasn't like a CG clusterfuck, pardon my French, of just mindless bodies being thrown at you. Like you knew each character, the sets were amazingly well choreographed, the action was easy to follow, the stakes were very clearly set up from each deliberate stage. It felt like an actual film ultimately being made. And for that to come from the movie event of the year, something that could have so easily fallen victim to the hype machine, like two other things that happened in 2019 concurrently with Endgame, and it just nailed it on all cylinders. Marvel pulled it off again. This is what they're best at. They are best at delivering blockbuster entertainment that just entertains and hits on every single level. And that's easily what makes No Way Home the number one best MCU Phase 4 entry for this year. And so far, easily within like some of the best movies released this year. So that's it for the individual ranking. We're just going to wrap this up real quick by doing our definitive overall rankings of the list. So we're all Universal. Spider-Man's at 1. So now for the next couple, so real quick before we go, so only because we had a lot of that spots in common, are we all okay with Falcon and Winter Soldier at 8 and Eternals at 9? All right.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I was about to say, I'm like, it's kind of obvious. All right, so we'll put those two there. So Eli, unfortunately, you're a little bit outvoted here as far as me and Eric goes. So you okay with Shang-Chi at 7, or like you think something would? Here's what I'll say: I definitely will understand like and veg at Black Widow being below Shang-Chi if you guys want it there, because I still have it pretty low as well.
Would make sense below. I think it would make sense below, since neither of us had Black Widow anywhere near as high as Eli had Shang-Chi.
Got it.
Right.
So so let me just.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But no, I completely acknowledge Shang-Chi's flaws. I'm totally willing to bump it down a few spots. That was just my personal preference.
Oh, of course. And your personal lists are still your personal list. This is just like the combined overall universal, like official, like talking TV.
That's exactly how I am with Eternals. Kind of. I'm like, I get why people don't like it, but I don't know. I've come to really like.
It's called compromise. It's like democracy. You put aside your own individual taste for the good of the many. Only in this case, it's coming up with the best list. So Black Widow at 7 and Shang-Chi at 6.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good.
That sounds pretty fair. All right. So this is where it gets interesting. 5 through 2, because we've got What If, we've got Loki, we've got Hawkeye, and we've got what's it called? And we've got WandaVision. So as far as where we go from here,
I mean, where do you have Hawkeye?
I had Loki at 2. I had What If at 3. So how about this? I'll fully admit What If I've got super high. What If goes at 5. I definitely think.
I do
like
believe we all have Hawkeye.
I've got Hawkeye at 4.
I do believe we all have Hawkeye below What If, though, on our list.
Oh, that's true.
Oh yeah, so
Ooh, that is true. So if that's the case, by unanimous consent, you're right. It's got to be Hawkeye next. Hawkeye, and then what if at 4?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
perfectly fine.
Right.
Yeah.
What if at 4? So that leaves it between WandaVision and Loki. And this is where the battle happens. Because I'm going to fight tooth and nail. Loki deserves to be above WandaVision at the very least. I'm going to fight tooth and nail on that.
We literally both have it at number 2 though.
We do, true. So
number 2.
that's true. Yeah. So how about this? So this is the one area where I'm not willing to veg on. This is the one area where I'm not willing to veg on. So I'll hear the opposing arguments from you guys now. Why should WandaVision go above Loki?
I mean, I kind of already delved into it a little bit, but I can go more. Eric, do you have anything to say about it?
I mean, okay, Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany, as much as I love Tom Hiddleston as Loki, like I think
so that's got acting on it. All right.
Paul Bettany, those are 2 of the best performances in the whole MCU. I think in that show.
True.
I think they're up there with Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. That's how good I think they are.
Like, are we factoring in like what are we factoring in? Are we factoring in pace? Are we factoring in like how it applies to story across the structure? Are we factoring in runtime? Are we factoring in like just overall like kind of satisfaction post conclusion? Are we factoring in like kind of intent of the show? Like what? Because as far as I'm concerned, on all those factors, Loki kicks WandaVision's ass out of the park. Despite the fact that the acting. Okay, you know what? I'll give WandaVision the acting.
What about filmmaking? I feel like WandaVision.
They're neck and neck. They're neck and neck for me personally.
I think WandaVision might be the best in the whole MCU from a filmmaking standpoint.
From a filmmaking standpoint, I personally think they're neck and neck because I think that everything WandaVision nails for TV aesthetic, Loki nails from a sci-fi setting. And the fact that it's like, so it's a typical like kind of like Star Trek like sci-fi setting, but it's got effects on the level of like the movie Star Trek, like that, like that's how good they are. Like that to me as well, I think should also be taken into account. Besides the fact,
yeah, it is tough because I do admit they're pretty close. And I think most people, but I think Loki was overall considered a bit better.
For me, what I personally see is it coming down to, just from my standpoint, is that WandaVision, it was way more of the hype rather than the actual quality. And that, to me, is where it comes down. Because I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't know if there's necessarily one thing that separates one from the other in terms of quality, but I think that Loki ultimately is a better product as far as how it utilizes all the things that I previously mentioned.
I would say some of the last few episodes of Loki, you could argue, are better than any WandaVision. But I would say every WandaVision is better than the first 3 episodes.
Just as well. But what I'm saying, so you take away the hype factor for WandaVision per week. Obviously, context matters, right? But just from the story standpoint, you take away the hype factor, there are easily some episodes of WandaVision I can cut. Cut that whole 4th episode. As good as you know what it is? You needed the 4th episode in order to like kind of like explain that, like, okay, because people were starting to get turned up by like the hokey nature because the first 3 episodes are like all in black and white. So it's like, if anything, like you could have cut one of those. You easily could have cut one of like the middle episodes, shrunk the whole thing down to like maybe 7 episodes, maybe. And I feel like that could have worked. So I think pacing is also this show's not its best friend, because again, you watch that show like together all at once. Like WandaVision to me, like I do not want to watch that show all at once. Like that's the thing that needs to be week to week. And that's like kind of where the hype overcomes the actual storytelling. That's where I'm coming from.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking like, I don't know. I'm trying to think about it mathematically where we have them at. Because
that's the problem. You can't apply mathematics to this. This is completely subjective. That's the problem here. There are no mathematics around.
Oh, okay. Well, because we both have it higher than you have Loki, right?
Right. If we're just doing it from a mathematics standpoint, then obviously I lose. But this is why I'm trying to play. Yeah. But obviously, yeah. No, but this is why I'm trying to play the argument. I'm trying to sway you guys.
But to be fair, you do have even I don't know if you totally lose though, because even from
sure, Loki's still top 3
lower than we have Loki.
I guess I'm just arguing for the merits. That like I truly do think that
I don't
one
know,
is actually
really
better
close
than the other.
me. Ultimately, like WandaVision, I guess it got me more excited. I guess when it was on. I guess by the end, I'm like, I think they're both satisfying journeys for Wanda and WandaVision and Loki. I don't know. I mean,
I think I say where we were coming from as far as like just the viewing goes. That's a respectable point, because the viewing habits just in general, those have to factor in as well. So Eli, you're gonna be the make or break here. Why is it WandaVision is going at 2 or Loki going at 2? You're the make or break.
I personally would put WandaVision at 2, and I'll tell you why. I just had way more problems with Loki than I did with WandaVision. WandaVision was at least consistent. I felt Loki was just a roller coaster where there was some very good moments, but there was also some very like moments, with the whole self-obsessed thing they had going on there, and then then I just really didn't like the third episode. I thought you could pretty much almost cut that episode entirely out of the show, and I don't think it would make that big of a difference.
For
personally.
ultimately where its payoff goes, because the only piece of important information you get out of that whole episode is the Sylvie revealing that the TVA is made up of variants, which I'm like, that you could have done that in the last episode.
I do think as well. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. This is probably more subjective, but like, I think WandaVision, the parts where it like kind of pulls on your heartstrings, like it pulls harder than Loki did. I think.
Exactly. I will say.
I'll give you that.
All
right. Feel you, and then the part where he's
Mhm.
like, what is grief but love persevering? Like there were so many parts, like that scene with like her and Vision meeting. Like I know the finale I was mixed on, but the second last one might have been my favorite one. Like,
you know what? All right, you guys have swayed me. I still don't personally think that it's better, but you guys have swayed me ultimately. So, guys, without further ado, the official drum roll, please. Talking TV podcast, Marvel Phase 4 2021, Year 1 ranked number 9, Eternals. Number 8, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Number 7, Black Widow. Number 6, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Number 5, Hawkeye. Number 4, What If? Number 3, Loki. Number 2, WandaVision. And number 1, Spider-Man No Way Home. Guys, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for coming on. I had a lot of fun with this. I'm hoping that we can do this again at the end of next year when we've got another year. My plan, just so I can like let you guys know, as far as like kind of now that Marvel is kind of back in our lives, my plan is to like now every year have like a different group of panel of people on, rank like the MCU stuff that's come out in that year, and then factor it into like the grand overarching MCU like ranked document. But that has been assembled here on the Talking TV channel, so therefore it's universal, comprised of multiple people, so it cannot be broken. It's etched in stone and will be there until the end of time. Guys, this was such a blast. Starting with Eric, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yeah, you can just follow me at Eric Thorpe Reviews, and I guess both on YouTube and on Instagram. And yeah, I don't know when my next video is gonna be up. I've been No Time to Die was like my first scripted video, and I thought, oh, okay, now I know how to kind of do the scripted, and then I realized how much work it was to do that again. And I haven't quite. I was trying with Eternals, and I'm trying now with No Way Home. I hope I get something out for No Way Home.
So, I think you'll get it there. So follow Eric. Eli, where can the people follow you online?
I unfortunately do not have a YouTube, but I do have an Instagram at E_Holicky, same way you see it spelled on the screen here, HOLICKY 45. That's E_Holicky 45. And I just don't have anything fancy about movies or anything, but I just
not yet
stuff about me in my life. Not yet. Yeah, it's true. You never know. Who knows what the future holds, but
yes.
Yeah.
And of course, thank you guys. Thanks to everyone in the chat for tuning in. This was a lot of fun. I'm so glad for the massive amount of input. It's MCU, so it was to be expected, but still, this was really, I had a blast with this as one of our last videos that we're doing for our third season for 2021. Of course, be sure to once again click the subscribe button and the like next to it. Follow us, as you can see, on our brand new Instagram page at Official Talking TV Podcast, as well on our Facebooks. And also be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews. Guys, this has been fun. That was the MCU Phase 4 Year 1. We'll be back next year to see where Phase 4 continues to take us into the great beyond. But in the meantime, keep tuning in for more Talking TV coverage of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and more going forward. 12 seasons in a short film. And for myself, Eli, Eric, watch more fucking movies. See you guys next time.